The eggs were going to burn. Clara felt it before she even looked. That split second where the kitchen goes 1 degree too quiet and the butter stops sizzling the way it should. She spun on her heel, grabbed the pan handle with a folded dish towel, and tilted it just right. The egg slid. Perfect. Golden at the edges, soft in the middle. Exactly the way old Mr. Patterson liked them on Tuesday mornings. She exhaled. That was Clara's life. Catching things before they fell. Eggs. Schedules. Bills. Her son. Speaking of which. Illy. She said his name softly, without turning around. A mother's radar. Infallible. A small head popped up from behind the counter, brown eyes wide, a half-eaten cracker in his fist. He was 4 years old, and already knew how to look innocent on command. "Stay where I can see you, baby." He nodded like he meant it. He probably did, for the next 3 minutes. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and carried Mr. Patterson's plate out to table 4. The diner was called Sunnyside, though the sign outside had been missing the S for going on 2 years, so most locals just called it Unnyside, as a joke. The floor tiles were cracked in 3 places near the door. The vinyl booth seats were patched with electrical tape, black strips against faded red, like stitches on old skin. The ceiling fan wobbled every 7th rotation, clicking like a metronome. But the coffee was strong, the portions were honest, and Clara knew every regular by name, by order, and by the exact way they liked their toast. It was a Tuesday in late September, and the morning rush had thinned to a comfortable hum, for tables occupied. The radio behind the counter played something slow and country. Sunlight came through the windows in long flat bars, catching the dust motes floating above the pie display case. This was Clara's world. Small, worn, hers. She was 31 years old, but some mornings felt older. Since Eli's father left 18 months ago. Not dramatically, not with a fight, just quietly, the way some men disappear like smoke. She had been doing everything alone. Rent, daycare on the days she could afford it, groceries calculated down to the cent. The transmission on her car was making a sound it had no business making, and she had been pretending not to hear it for 6 weeks. She smiled at Mr. Patterson as she set down his eggs. "Golden, just like you asked." He looked up from his newspaper. "You're a good girl, Clara." She didn't correct him. She never did. She was refilling the coffee at table 2 when she heard it. The parking lot outside the window, usually home to dusty pickup trucks and one bicycle chained to the stop sign, filled suddenly with a different kind of presence. The car was black and long, and so clean it looked like it had never once encountered a dirt road. It moved slowly, deliberately, the way powerful things often do. It parked across 2 spaces without apology. The man who stepped out matched the car. He was tall, somewhere in his late 50s, with silver hair combed back from his face, and a suit that probably cost more than Clara's rent. Not last month's rent, more like 6 months. His shoes were the kind that clicked on pavement with purpose. He wore no tie, but his collar was crisp, his watch gold and heavy on his wrist. He stood in the parking lot for a moment, looked at the diner the way people look at something they've already decided about, and then walked toward the door. The little bell above the entrance chimed. The whole diner seemed to take a breath. Clara noticed a shift. She always did. When someone new walked in, especially someone who looked like they had taken a wrong turn from somewhere better, the regulars would glance up and then back down, recalibrating. Mr. Patterson peeked over his newspaper. The couple at table 6 went quiet mid-sentence. Even the ceiling fan seemed to slow its wobble. Clara straightened her apron and walked over. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm and even. "Sit anywhere you like. I'll be right with you." The man looked at her. His eyes were sharp and pale, gray, almost the kind of eyes that were always measuring. He chose the booth by the window, the best seat in the house, if you could call it that. He sat down, picked up the laminated menu, and studied it with the concentration of someone reading a contract. Clara gave him a moment, then approached with her notepad. "Can I start you off with some coffee?" "Black," he said, not rude, just economical, like words cost him something. She poured. He didn't watch her. He was still looking at the menu. "Ready to order, or do you need another minute?" He set the menu down. The steak and eggs. Clara kept her expression easy. The steak and eggs was the most expensive thing on the menu, $22, which in a diner like this was almost a statement. She wrote it down. How would you like the steak? Medium rare. And the eggs? Over easy. Toast. Sourdough. She wrote it all down. Perfect. I'll get that in for you. She turned to go. And orange juice, he added without looking up. Fresh squeezed, if you have it. They did not have fresh squeezed orange juice. They had a carton in the back that said, not from concentrate, and Clara had never once in 3 years been asked about fresh squeezed. She turned back. We have chilled orange juice. It's good. I can tell you that honestly. He looked at her then. Really looked at her. Just for a second. Something passed across his face. Not quite a smile. Not quite its opposite. Fine, he said. Clara walked back to the kitchen. She clipped the order to the wheel and spun it toward Marco, the cook. He glanced at it and raised his eyebrows at the steak. Fancy, he said. Just cook it right, Clara said. She checked on Eli, who had migrated from behind the counter to a spot near the end of the bar where she'd made him a small nest, a folded apron for a cushion, his worn stuffed rabbit, and a box of crayons on the floor beside him. He was drawing something with fierce concentration. She touched the top of his head as she passed. He didn't look up. That meant he was okay. She refilled coffees, cleared a table, brought the gray-eyed man his juice. He was looking out the window. When she set it down, she noticed his hands were folded on the table, perfectly still, like a man who had learned a long time ago not to fidget. There was something deliberate about him. Practice. The food came out in 11 minutes, which for a steak was fast. Marco had done it right. The meat was pink in the middle. The eggs trembled perfectly. The sourdough was golden and stacked beside the plate like it meant business. Clara carried it to the table herself. She set it down carefully. Steak and eggs, medium rare, over easy, sourdough toast. Let me know if you need anything. The man looked at the plate for a long moment. He picked up his fork, cut into the steak, looked at the color inside. Then, without a word, he began to eat. Clara watched him for only a second before turning away. In that second, she noticed something she couldn't quite name. He wasn't eating like a man enjoying a meal. He was eating like a man conducting an experiment. She went back to her rounds. Topped off Mr. Patterson's coffee. Checked on table 6. Wiped down the counter. Kept one eye on Eli, who was now holding up his drawing, something that may have been a dog or possibly a rocket ship. She gave him a thumbs up, and he beamed. The morning held its shape. But Clara could feel it, the way you feel weather before it changes. Something in the air around that window booth was different, charged somehow, like the moment before a storm decides what it's going to do. She didn't know yet what the man was testing. She didn't know yet that she was a test. She just kept moving, kept smiling, kept catching things before they fell. That was what she did. That was who she was. The man ate slowly. That was the first thing Clara noticed when she looped back around to check on him. Most people at Sunnyside ate the way people eat when they're hungry and in a hurry. Elbows on the table, fork moving fast, eyes on the plate. This man ate like he had all the time in the world and intended to use every second of it. Small cuts, deliberate chews, long pauses where he would simply look out the window at the parking lot, at his gleaming black car, sitting there like a monument among ordinary things. Clara refilled his coffee without being asked. He didn't thank her, but he nodded, a small, controlled dip of the chin that she had learned to read as acknowledgement. She'd had colder customers. She'd had meaner ones. She kept her smile in place the way a good poker player keeps their face still, not because she felt nothing, but because she had learned a long time ago that the diner floor was not the place to feel things openly. Eli had fallen into a light doze in his little corner nest, his stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, crayon still loosely held in his fingers. Clara glanced at him between every other task. It was automatic like breathing. Every time she saw the small rise and fall of his chest, she felt the knot in her own chest loosen by a fraction. The diner thinned further. Mr. Patterson settled his bill with exact change and a slow wave goodbye. The couple at table 6 left a $5 tip on a $12 order, which made Clara's morning. By the time the gray-eyed man was finishing Alassa's toast, there were only 2 other tables occupied: a teenage girl doing homework over a hot chocolate, and a truck driver named Dale, who came in every other Tuesday and always ordered the same thing and never said more than 6 words. It was quiet. The good kind, usually. The man pushed his plate forward a few inches, not to the edge, just enough to signal he was done. Clara was there within moments. All finished. He looked up. It was adequate. Adequate. Clara almost laughed. Not because it was funny exactly, but because Marco had practically performed surgery on that steak, and adequate was what it earned. She kept the laugh behind her teeth. "I'm glad," she said simply. "Can I get you anything else? We have a very good apple pie today, made fresh this morning." He considered this for a moment, the way he seemed to consider everything, as if nothing was too small to evaluate. "No," he said, "just the bill." "Of course." She went to the register, printed the receipt, and brought it back on a small plastic tray, the kind with faded sunflower in the center, chipped at the edges. She set it down and stepped back. He picked it up, looked at the total. $26.40 with the juice. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a slim leather wallet. He slid out a card, black, no logo visible from where Clara stood. The kind of card that didn't need a logo because everyone who mattered already knew what it meant. He set it on the tray without a word. Clara took it to the register, ran it, brought it back with a merchant copy and a pen. He picked up the pen. And here is where time did something strange. It slowed. The way time slows during car accidents and bad phone calls and moments, even as they're happening, that you will remember for a long time. Clara was standing a polite distance away, not hovering, just present the way good servers are, visible without being intrusive. She watched his hand move across the receipt. She wasn't trying to look. But the diner was quiet and the booth was close and his handwriting was large and deliberate. And when he wrote a 0 on the tip line, she saw it as clearly as if it had been written on the wall. A 0, not a small, uncertain 0. Not the kind of 0 you write when you're distracted or in a hurry and you mean to come back to it. A bold, certain, fully committed 0. Round and complete and absolute. Then he signed his name beneath it with a single sharp stroke. He clicked the pen, set it down, and looked directly at Clara. She did not flinch. She was proud of that afterward, in the moment. She felt several things at once. A hot rush of something in her chest that was not quite anger but was its close neighbor, a flicker of fear about what her manager would say if this went badly. And beneath both of those, something quieter and more complicated. A sadness, almost, not for herself, for the way some people move through the world, using their money like a ruler they expected everyone else to measure themselves against. But her face stayed steady. She stepped forward, picked up the tray, and looked at the receipt. She let one beat of silence pass. Then two. Then she looked at him. "Sir," she said, and her voice came out calmer than she expected, "I just want to let you know that for our accounting, we do need the tip line filled in even when there's no gratuity. A signed 0 is perfectly fine. I just want to make sure the receipt is complete." She said it the way you'd explain a store policy. Matter of fact. Professional. No edge. Something shifted in his eyes. It was small, a fractional thing, like a crack appearing in stone. But Clara had been reading people across diner tables for years, and she caught it. He had expected something else. She could see that now. He had been waiting for something. Raised voice, trembling lip, barely contained fury. He had written that 0 and leaned back and waited for the reaction, the way you wait for a car alarm you've just set off. And she had handed him paperwork. She kept her eyes on his, not challenging, not pleading, just steady, present. He looked at the receipt, then back at her. "I appreciate your patience," she said, and she meant it in more layers than one. "Take your time." She set the tray back down gently and stepped away to give him space. Her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat against her apron as she turned, hiding them the way she had most things, smoothly, without drawing attention. She went to the counter and began straightening the sugar caddies that didn't need straightening, working from left to right. because she needed something to do with her hands, and her heart was beating a little too loud inside her chest. Marco appeared at the kitchen window. He had seen something from his side, the look on Clara's face, maybe, or the particular quality of the diner's silence. He raised his eyebrows at her. A question. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Not now. I'm fine. Keep cooking. He disappeared back into the kitchen. Eli stirred in his nest, but didn't wake. His rabbit slipped from his arm, and she watched it fall, without moving to catch it. Because she was still watching the man in the booth from the corner of her eye, still measuring the distance between what had just happened and what might happen next. The man was looking at her. He had been looking at her since she walked away. She could feel it the way you feel sun on your back without seeing it, a warmth, or in this case something closer to its opposite, a pressure. She turned and walked back over, because standing behind the counter pretending to rearrange sugar packets was not who she was. "Tips," she said, and her voice came out quiet and clear. "Are blessings. They're not obligations." She paused, not for drama, because she needed the pause. And my dignity doesn't depend on someone else's generosity. Silence, not the comfortable silence of an empty diner. I held silence. The teenage girl with her homework had gone very still. Even Dale, the truck driver, had looked up from his plate. The man in the suit stared at her. His pale gray eyes moved over her face, like he was reading something complicated and wanted to get right. She held his gaze, not with defiance, with something quieter and harder to argue with. Then something happened that she did not expect. He looked away first. He looked down at his hands, those still, folded hands, and something in his jaw moved, like a man swallowing something difficult. The sharp certainty that had been sitting on him like a second suit seemed, for just a moment, to slip. Clara didn't know what he was seeing in that moment. She couldn't have known. She couldn't have known that he was seeing a kitchen, smaller than this one, in a house in a town 3 states away, a long time ago. She couldn't have known that he was seeing his mother, a woman with tired hands and a worn apron not so different from Clara's, who had worked double shifts and swallowed her pride at 100 different tables so that he could eat, so that he could go to school, so that he could become a man who now sat in this booth in this cracked-tile diner with a gold watch on his wrist and a 0 on a receipt. He didn't say any of this. He said nothing at all. But when Clara glanced at the tray again, she saw the pen was in his hand. And when he set it back down and slid the tray toward her, the 0 was still there, but beneath his signature, in smaller letters, he had written 2 words. "I'm sorry." She looked at it for a moment, then at him. He was already reaching into his jacket. The envelope was plain white, no logo, no name printed on the front, just a simple white rectangle that he pulled from his inside jacket pocket and held for a moment before setting it on the table beside the tray. He pressed it flat with 2 fingers, the way you'd press down a photograph you wanted to look at one more time before putting it away. Then he looked up at Clara. "This isn't charity," he said. His voice was different now. Not softer exactly, but the economy was gone from it. The clipped, contractual efficiency that had shaped every word he'd said since walking through the door. He sounded, for the first time, like a person rather than a position. "I want you to understand that before you open it." Clara looked at the envelope, then at him. She didn't reach for it yet. "I don't know you," she said. Carefully, honestly. "No," he agreed. "You don't." Another pause. The ceiling fan clicked through its rotation. 6, 7, and wobbled on the 7th the way it always did. "My name is Gerald Harlan," he said. And then, as if the name alone was enough, as if he understood that names meant less than he had once believed, he said, "My mother was a waitress for 23 years. Clara went very still. He wasn't looking at her now. He was looking at the table, at his own hands, the gold watch catching the flat September light coming through the window. "She worked at a place not very different from this one," he continued. "Same kind of floor, same kind of people. She used to come home with her feet swollen and her back aching, and she never—" He stopped, pressed his lips together briefly. "She never complained. Not once. Not to me, anyway. Maybe to herself. Probably to herself. But never where I could hear it." Clara set the tray down. She wasn't going anywhere. "She passed 4 years ago," Harlan said. And I had money by then, real money. And I kept telling myself I'd slow down, I'd visit more, I'd take care of her properly. You know how that story goes. She did. She knew it the way most people know it. Not from books, but from the hollow place that particular regret leaves in people when they carry it too long. I came in here today, he paused again, and this time it was a longer pause, the kind that cost something to get through. I came in here with a test in mind. I've done it before. Different diners, different people. I tell myself it's about character, that I'm looking to see how people respond under pressure. He glanced up at her, but that's not entirely honest. Clara waited. I think, he said slowly, like a man feeling his way along a dark wall, that I come into places like this, and I sit down and I order, and I watch because I'm looking for her. My mother. I'm looking for her in the way someone moves through a hard morning without breaking. And then when I find it, when I see it, he exhaled. I test it, because I'm angry, I suppose, that she's gone, that I didn't do enough. And if I can make the moment ugly, make the person in front of me react badly, then maybe I can feel justified in the distance I kept. Maybe it wasn't my fault. Maybe people like her are just... He shook his head. It's ugly reasoning. I know that. The diner was cathedral quiet now. Dale had put his fork down. The teenage girl had closed her notebook. Clara looked at Gerald Harlan, really looked at him, the way she hadn't let herself before, because when you're working, you don't get the luxury of seeing customers as full human beings with full human histories. You see the order, the table number, the tip line. She saw him now, a man in an expensive suit who had been carrying something heavy for 4 years and had just, unexpectedly, set a piece of it down on a cracked tile table in a diner called Sunnyside, where the S had been missing from the sign for going on 2 years. What was her name? Clara asked. He blinked, like the question surprised him, like no one had asked him that in a while. Ruth, he said. Clara nodded slowly. Ruth sounded like she was something. He smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him, small and private and shot through with grief. She was everything, he said simply, a sound from the corner, small and soft. Eli had woken up, unhurried, the way children wake when they haven't been startled, gradually surfacing, rubbing one eye with a fist, looking around the diner with the calm bewilderment of the newly conscious. His stuffed rabbit was on the floor, and he picked it up without distress and clutched at his chest. And then his eyes found Clara the way they always did first, like she was a fixed point everything else was measured from. She raised her hand. A small wave. I'm here. You're okay. He looked then at the man in the booth. Children stare without apology, and Eli was no exception. He studied Gerald Harlan with open, uncomplicated curiosity. No wariness, no performance, just pure, honest looking. Harlan looked back at him. Something moved across the older man's face, a wave of something complicated that passed through and left him looking older and younger at the same time. How old? He asked. 4, Clara said. His name is Eli. Harlan nodded, looked at Eli for another moment. Then he pushed the envelope across the table toward Clara with a quiet finality that said the decision had already been made long before he'd walked through the door, maybe before he'd even driven into this town. Open it later, he said. When you're home. When he's asleep. He paused. There's a note inside. Read that first. Clara looked at the envelope. A war moved through her in about 3 seconds flat. Pride on one side, practicality on the other, and something more complicated than either one holding the middle ground. She thought about the transmission sound her car had been making for 6 weeks. She thought about Eli's winter coat from last year that was already too small across the shoulders. She thought about her mother's voice in her head, the one that said you don't take things from strangers. And then she thought about another voice, her own, the one that had just told a man with a gold watch that dignity doesn't depend on someone else's generosity. This wasn't charity, he had said. She believed him. She didn't fully understand it yet, but she believed him. She picked up the envelope. It was thick between her fingers, thicker than a note alone would make it. She didn't open it. She held it at her side. Thank you, she said. And then, because it was true and it deserved to be said plainly, for telling me about Ruth. His jaw moved. He nodded once. He slid out of the booth, straightened his jacket with both hands, and picked up the signed receipt from the tray. He looked at the 2 words he'd written beneath his signature, "I'm sorry," and then he folded it once and slipped it into his pocket, like he wanted to keep it, like it was something he needed to carry for a while. He walked to the door. The little bell chimed. He paused with one hand on the frame and looked back at the diner, at the cracked tiles and the patched booths and the wobbling ceiling fan and the girl with her notebook and Dale with his coffee, and Eli standing now, rabbit under his arm, watching with those wide, uncomplicated eyes. He looked at Clara last. She met his gaze and gave him what she hoped he could read clearly, not forgiveness exactly, because forgiveness is a long road, and they had only just reached the start of it, but something adjacent, something open, a door left unlocked rather than swung wide. He nodded. Then he was gone. The bell settled. The parking lot filled briefly with the sound of a powerful engine, and then that too faded, until the only sound was the ceiling fan and the radio and the soft clatter of Marco in the kitchen, and Eli padding across the tile floor toward his mother in his socks. She crouched down and caught him as he reached her, folded him into her chest, felt his small arms go around her neck. She held the envelope in one hand and her son in the other, and stayed like that for a moment, just a moment, with her eyes closed. Later at home, after Eli was bathed and fed, and asleep with his rabbit tucked under his chin, Clara sat at the kitchen table under the single overhead light and opened the envelope. The note was handwritten on plain paper in the same large, deliberate script she had watched sign the receipt. She read it slowly. "I have tested a lot of people. I have told myself it was about character. It wasn't. It was about fear. The fear that the world my mother endured didn't matter, that the sacrifices of quiet, tired, dignified people like her go unnoticed and unrewarded and mean nothing in the end. You showed me I was wrong, not by arguing, not by breaking, just by standing there, steady the way she used to stand. The money in this envelope is not a tip. It is not charity. It is a debt, not to you personally, but to everyone like you, which includes a woman who made me. I am sorry it took me this long to understand that. Take care of that boy. He has your eyes. Gee, Harlan." Clara read it twice. Then she set it down and counted the money. It was enough to cover 6 months of rent, the car repair, Eli's winter coat, and a good one this time. A cushion, thin but real, between her and the next emergency. She sat with it for a long time. The kitchen was quiet around her. Outside the window the town had gone to sleep, ordinary and small in hers. She thought about Ruth, who had worked 23 years in tired shoes, so her son could wear a gold watch. She thought about dignity, how it lives not in what people give you, but in what you refuse to surrender. She thought about Gerald Harlan driving back to wherever he came from with 2 words folded in his pocket, and a face that looked, at the end, like a man who had put something down after carrying it too long. She hoped the weight of it was less now. She hoped he slept. She folded the note carefully, put it back in the envelope, and set it on top of the refrigerator, high enough that Eli couldn't reach it, safe enough that she could find it on the days when she needed reminding. Then she turned off the kitchen light and went to check on her son. He was sleeping soundly. The rabbit was on the floor again. She picked it up and tucked it back under his arm. He didn't wake. He just exhaled, small and soft and complete, and settled deeper into sleep. Clara stood in the doorway for a moment, one hand on the frame, watching the rise and fall of his chest in the dark. Then she smiled, the kind that doesn't need an audience, and she went to bed. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of someone who carried quiet dignity through hard days, give a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Because sometimes the most powerful moments don't happen in boardrooms or on big stages. Sometimes they happen in small diners, between 2 people, over a plate of eggs and a 0 on a receipt, and they change everything.